Hello, my name is Seth Guimont, and I'm doing a presentation for Metropolitan State Class ICS 382-50 for Professor Faisal Kaleem. Quick disclaimer before we begin the presentation on SQL injection. This presentation is solely for educational purposes, and I am not liable for any destructive use or damages caused by the information dispensed in this presentation. Another disclaimer I would like to throw out there is that if you have no prior knowledge of SQL as a programming language, I would highly suggest looking that up before watching this video, as it'll help you understand the scope of these cyber attacks. All right, and with that, let's get started with our presentation. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on SQL injection, information, history, and practice. Before I continue this presentation, I would like to mention that if you have no prior knowledge of what SQL is, please pause this video and research that before watching the rest of this video. I really think that's important to getting the full breadth of what SQL injection is and really appreciating the content of this video and appreciating the devastation that these attacks can cause. With that said, I'm going to assume that from now on, anybody watching this has a little bit of knowledge of SQL as a language. Let's get started with the history of SQL injection. It's often called the attack that will never go away. And the reason for that is it was first discovered in 1998 and still really prominent, despite the fact it's not really that hard to prevent. The first recorded SQL injection was performed by a gentleman named Jeff Forrestal. At the time was known as Rainforest Puppy. Very famous cybersecurity researcher, and there's a lot of information about him online as well. I would highly suggest researching him if you want more information on how SQL injection was kind of birthed. If you're more interested in like a list of prominent SQL attacks, you can go to this SQL Injection Hall of Shame website, and you'll be very surprised to see just how popular and common these attacks are from that website. So what is an SQL injection, given that it's so popular and so simple, but it's been around so long? It's a type of code injection. The official definition of an SQL injection is an attack in which malicious code is inserted into strings that are later passed to an instance of SQL Server for parsing and execution. That's taken from the Microsoft website. This kind of relies on the vulnerability of GET statements inside like PHP forms. So like sign-up forms, contact forms, login forms, any sort of form that you're filling out that uses GET statements could potentially be vulnerable to SQL attacks. If you've done any PHP coding before, you know that GET statements are very common. In fact, most forms that you're going to write are at least going to have one GET statement somewhere. And what are the features of SQL injection? They're considered like the easiest type of hack to perform. You don't need any special equipment really. When I demonstrate it later, I'm going to use some programs that are helpful, but you don't need them per se. They're also really easy to avoid with modern coding techniques. And we'll go over a lot of those towards the end of the presentation after I demonstrate exactly how SQL injection works. Finding vulnerable websites is actually pretty simple as well, as there's like a long list of these things called Google Dorks. These Google Dorks will help a potential attacker find a vulnerable website. And when I keep mentioning that they're very common, but they're actually still listed by the Open Web Application Security Project as the #1 security threat of 2017, and it doesn't seem like that's really going to be any different for 2018, as it's been that way for many years. If you want to kind of reference either of those, either the Google Dorks, that's the first URL listed on the bottom, and that Open Web Application Security Project is listed below that one as well. Now, SQL injection, there's not just one type of SQL injection. There's blind SQL injection, which is the hardest to perform, and you can kind of get that from the name. And then it has a couple subtypes, Boolean and time-based. union-based, which is actually the most popular type of SQL injection, which basically just uses two select statements. If you've used SQL, you know how a union statement works. And then there's error-based, which is the easiest to perform, but that really only works on the Microsoft SQL. So what are the threats with SQL injections? There's denial of service attacks, tampering with records. You can escalate a certain user's privilege. So let's say you were found, a password for a specific username, and you were able to get into somebody's site. You could escalate your own privilege. There's identity spoofing, and the most obvious thing would be data disclosure, because I think a lot of people would do that looking for data. And again, that list is taken from that Google Dorks website as well. There are a few different tools we can use for SQL injection. Like I said, I'm going to use SQL Map to demonstrate later, and then there's this Havij as well. SQL Map I know is on the Kali Linux distro, so if you have Kali Linux and you want to try any of this stuff out yourself, then it's pretty easy to do that with SQL Map. So let's kind of go into the demonstration here. We're going to use SQL Map used in conjunction with this vulnerableweb.com website. Obviously, too, if you don't want to use that one, there's the damn vulnerable web app. I'm just using this one because it seemed a little bit simpler, and we've already done some things with the damn vulnerable web app as well. So let's go to our demonstration. And voila, we are magically in my Kali Linux distro. Okay, so we have this vulnerable website. Now, how do we know, or how can we figure out that it's vulnerable? Well, we can look at the URL, and we notice that there's a PHP statement at the top with category. So we can kind of guess that might be a get statement there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a few different things in here. So I'm going to just see how it reacts. I'm going to say 2. And sure enough, that gives me a different site. That gives me the painting site, all right? But I want to kind of mess with the system a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a star there. And if a star is going to be like the all statement. And when I do that, I get an error message. Now this error message looks like it's pretty common, but it actually gives us quite a bit of information. We know that this uses MySQL server. And that's enough for us to kind of figure out that this is vulnerable. So now that we know that this website's vulnerable, let's try and get some information from it. All right? And how we can do that is just using SQL Map. So I'm going to close this. And I already have some kind of canned statements I'm going to use just to save some time here. I have them in my Notepad my Notepad here. Okay. So if I've never used SQL Map before, and I want to know a few things, I can just do SQL Map-H. Right? And that'll give me a general overview of some of the more basic commands that you can use with SQL Map. And there's a lot of options. Going into every option SQL Map is well beyond the scope of this video, but as you can see, there's a lot that we can do. So I want to get general information from this website. All right. And like I said, I've kind of already ran these, so they're going to run a little bit faster than they normally would. Normally, it would take a little bit of time for all this stuff to load. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the database schema of this website. Notice here I have the database schema right here. Okay. So I'm just going to enter that. And like I said before, normally this would take a little bit of extra time to load. But it gives us quite a bit of information about this website. And gives us a little bit about possible errors. It gives us the version of MySQL, which is this 5.0. It lets us know what type of PHP it's using. A lot of information there. So, okay, I know that there's two databases. We have ACU art and then information schema. Well, I'm not really interested in information schema. I'm more interested for this particular exercise to look at the main database here. So let's get the tables of that database. Okay, so now all I did was the same command I did before, but now instead of getting a database schema, I'm getting the tables right there. And voila, I have all the tables I need. So what tables would be of interest? Well, if I'm a hacker looking for some sort of information I can use nefariously, I'm looking at the users, I'm looking at the artists, and maybe even the guest book too. Well, let's just assume that we're looking at users first. Okay, so I want to know what columns users had. So I'm just going to basically do the same type of deal here. I'm going to put in my SQL map and my URL, but now I'm going to tell the program to use the table, users, and then I want the columns. So I'm using this database, the ACU art, -table users, and then telling it to find columns. We're going to get information about those columns as well, like are they varchar, tiny int, whatever. And so as we can see, we have the address, we have cart, which maybe is the things that that person is planning to buy. CC, I'm not sure what that is. It could be credit card information, email address, the name, their password, which will probably be hashed if we pull it up. There's ways to unhash that, their phone number, and their username. All right. So from here, let's just find their name. And sure enough, we find their name. And their name is just a bunch of gobbledygook because this is a test website, obviously. But if this was a real website, you'd be able to get a lot of real information out of that. And of course, just finding any of the information from the other columns. Let's say we want to do category. Right, so that's the category that there was for each type of site or each link to each site there. We have the category ID, which is an int of 5, whatever that, or the cdesc, which I'm not sure what that means. And we have the category name. Let's see what the category name is. Okay. And we have posters, paintings, stickers, and graffiti. All right, so that kind of tells us that, yeah, those are categories of art. And you can just keep going on and on like this until you find pretty much anything you want crawling through the database, so to speak. So there's a lot you can do with this, these are great tools if you're trying to hack-proof your own website. Obviously, these can be used for not such good purposes as well, but these tools are definitely originally developed for pen testing your own web application. All right. All right, so let's talk next a little bit about prevention. Okay, so talking a little bit about prevention, and how do we prevent SQL injections from happening? Well, the big thing would be using prepared statements and stored procedures. So instead of there being any opportunity for anybody to enter anything manually on a specific table, then everything relies more on like a stored procedure. And again, if you have experience developing stored procedures in SQL, that would make sense. There's also whitelisting, input validation, and then escaping all user supplied input. But I think the biggest thing, and one of the things that has been definitely drilled into my head, is just enforcing rules of least privilege. So basically, whoever or whatever doesn't need access to your database, don't let them have that access, and only give people the access they really need. Right? And again, these are all taken from the website below, where it's the SQL injection prevention cheat sheet. All right. So I hope this has been informative for everybody. If you have any more questions or just want to try this out, downloading Kali Linux is relatively simple. I have it on my laptop as a VM, and it runs pretty well. So thank you, everybody, for watching my video, and I will see you all later.